with you because over the last few years we've had a really interesting scenario. And by the way, one of the things that SafeBreak got for mention, we've done a session, we've had a flight, and we've also had a PCR test every day, okay, just to make sure we could go to the next place. But over the last couple of years, we've had some interesting things happen. When COVID first hit in the U.S., you know, all of our schools that are using McGraw Hill materials, they had technology that we had already created for the programs. And so we started to do some sessions because we knew most of us as teachers were not prepared to go totally virtual the way that we had to. So we did a number of sessions about using the technology that they already had to do remote learning. And we came to a really quick realization because let me give you one example. In our Wonders program, which is our K-5 reading, to use the technology, the very first thing you have to do as a teacher is set up your calendar. And until you set up your calendar, you really don't use anything. So we would start the Wonder session and start talking about the technology, and immediately the question would come up, how do you set up your calendar? And what did that tell us? They weren't using the technology. So in this time, we first, I think a lot of teachers first, when we entered the COVID cycle and were remote, tried to do on Zoom or Teams or Google Meets exactly the same thing we're doing in the classroom before they went remote. And I don't know about you, but I don't like to sit in front of a computer for 6 hours a day. Our high school students don't like to sit in front of a computer 6 hours a day. And I can't think of a K or 1 or 2 student that can sit in front of a computer for that many hours a day. So then we started to shift our practices. And we started to think about how can I do something with the class, how can I have them do something independently, or for our younger students with their parents, and then come back and look at what they've done. And we played around with a lot of different ideas. Some have been successful, some haven't. But I do have a great fear after we're back into the classroom. In fact, it was really interesting. In Saudi, they just went back in classrooms 2 weeks ago. There are some students in 2nd grade that have just now been in a classroom. So all of that work you kindergarten and 1st grade teachers in helping them get ready, that's 2nd grade teachers now having to do. So we've learned some interesting things. The thing we don't want to see happen is some of the successful things we've done, we don't want to leave those behind. Because I tell you, for my building leaders in here, one of the dangers you face is when I walk back live into my classroom, I go back to just what I was doing before we started all this. Now, I'm going to talk to you about 5 things today in the time that we have together, okay? And I'm actually going to put the numbers up on the screen. We're going to start out with number 1. And I just want to do a little preface to this. Because how big is technology? How long could we talk about technology? We could talk about technology for weeks. Many of you have taken a course on technology in the classroom, and you were in that class for numerous weeks. And really what that means, guys, is we can't talk about everything. We can talk about a few things this morning. One thing I'm not really going to talk about much is what students produce with technology. I'm not going to do that, not because it's not important. In fact, it's one of the most important things about technology in our schools is what are you having your students do in your classroom to produce product with technology? Because by doing that, that's when students really start to learn and master those ideas. And so we want to make sure that they're doing that. Let me give you one example really quickly. I'm going to talk to you about some things today, but you know what? That will not cause you to learn it. Some of what we're going to talk about today, you already know. I'm going to remind you. Oh, yeah, I know that. Some of those things you're going to say, yeah, I'm doing that. Some of the things you're going to say, I should be doing that. But we're going to talk about a lot. And let me give you an example of how we learn best. My background was science and math. Okay? When you really learn addition and subtraction and multiplication and division, you know when you really learn it? We learn our fact fluency, right? But you really learn it when you start to use it in algebra. Because you know what? If you can't multiply and divide, you can't do algebra. And you know when you learn algebra? You learn algebra when you take calculus. And you know when you learn calculus? When you take differential equations, because you have to use the calculus to do the differential equations. And you know when I learned differential equations? I really did. Okay? I took the class, but I never had to use it. You know who learns it? The engineers. And then the other way we do it is when we start to teach it, that's when we really learn it. What that means is when we talk about product by students, they're really going to learn it when they have to dive into it and when they have to start sharing it with other people. Because if all I have to do is regurgitate it on a test, I can just memorize and get away with it. So you really need to think about that, but that's not where we're going to spend our time. We're going to spend our time on a couple other topics. So number one, just realize we're not going to try to talk about everything. We're going to talk about a few. Number two, what are the outcomes that we want to look at today? I want to ask you to do two things today in this session in the breakout, whether you're in the room or whether the people that are joining us virtually. Number one, I'd ask you just to thoughtfully consider about the ideas that you hear. You know, when two people have a conversation, it can happen two different ways, and each have a very different outcome. One of the ways is you could be talking to me, and I could be thinking about what I want to say back to you. I'm not even really listening to what you're saying to me. I just know the idea I want to get across, and I'm not paying attention. That's not really productive conversation. Or I can be listening to try to understand you, and then respond to that. One of the things I found out when we sit and learn, regardless of what it is, we have two potential responses. One I call reactive. I disagree with that, or, you know what, I've already do that. The other way is to say, let me think about that. And so the first one I'd ask you to do is just think about what we talk about. Consider it in your practice. But here's the most important one. I want you to dream and create and take action. And here's what I mean by that. If you leave here today, you can say a couple things. You can say, boy, that was lousy, but the meal was good. Or you could say, oh, that was inspiring. However you think about it. But if you leave here and you don't do anything because of our time together, we've all wasted our time today. So at the minimum, I would like you to think about what's one thing I need to evaluate, what's one practice I need to institute, what's something I need to do more research on, because as we look at the ideas ahead, that's what you need to consider. But we'll be successful if you walk out and you do one thing because of the time that we shared today, whether it's in this session or in one of the breakout sessions. Okay? So those are the two things I'd like you to do. What's after number two? Yeah, you thought you were going to be quiet, okay? What's after number two? Number three. So, in the history of education, I'm going to give you a short, 3-minute history lesson. In the history of education, from when we started teaching years and years, thousands of years ago, there have been 3 transformative shifts that have happened in time. And when I say transformative, what I mean is 3 shifts that have changed the landscape of education totally. The first of those shifts is this right here. And look at how long ago that happened. Okay, 3500 BC. This is some pictographic writing. In fact, from Mesopotamia, so the area we're in where it all started. But if you think about that, why was this a transformational change? Because before this happened, everything was verbally shared and communicated. We had minstrels that shared stories and we told stories. And that's how we transferred history. That's how we transferred knowledge. But there's an inherent weakness in transferring it verbally. And in fact, if we had the time today, I could come over here and with you, I could share 2 sentences. I could whisper it in your ear. And I'd say, you know what? Share it with the next person. And share it with the next person. And by the time it got to the back corner back there, would it be the same? No, we know it wouldn't. You know what? Even in this room, in 5 minutes sharing that, it would change. Because you know what? I didn't hear one word correctly, and I kind of altered a little bit, or I swapped a couple of words, and before you know it, what we find out in the back of the room is totally different from what happened. And in fact, it happens individually with us. My brother loves to fish. When he goes and does fishing, he'll call me or send me a picture, and he had a fish that was this long. When he talks to his buddy tomorrow, somehow that fish is now this long. And next year when he tells me the same story, kids forgot it, but man, that fish was this long. And you know what? It changes over time and enhances. When we started to be able to write it down, we were able to transmit history for hundreds and hundreds of years and still have accuracy take place. And in fact, we've seen that's true by the discoveries of scrolls and writings in this area here that are then compared to the writings we have today, and the error is minimal because we were able to do that. So one of the major shifts we had is right here. The second one then is right here. And that's when we not only had the written language, we were able to start printing those materials rather than everybody writing it down. Because you know what? Once the print happened, we had that material by hand copied. And in fact, one of the most precious gifts that you could give somebody, like if they sent a delegation to Constantinople to see the emperor, often the gift they brought was a book. It was a book that was hand copied because it was priceless. Now, not only with the printed, this is in fact one of the earliest print books that we have. Notice the passage in time. 4,000 years from the writing to almost to the print. One of the other things that changed about the print is once we had the printing press. And in fact, the real transformation happened when we had the public access to get their hands on those printed materials. Because now, when the printing first happened or the letters first happened, who had access to the books? Two groups of people. The rich and the people that were in the religious institutions that were actually copying those manuscripts. Once the printing press happened, and once we had the opportunity for people to have access to those printed materials, ideas could freely transfer from one person to the other. And in fact, if I think back to my early school years, we didn't have the computers in the building or anything like that. But I could go to the library and anything I wanted to study, I could pull out that old card catalog and look up the book I wanted and find that book and study it. Okay? And we have access to information that people for hundreds and hundreds of years didn't. This was the second major shift in education. The third one is actually happening today. Okay? If you want to figure something out or there's something, or somebody even says, you know what, who was the actress in that movie? What do? Yeah, you know what? It's actually become a word. Okay? What do? Google it. Okay? We're going to Google it. You know what? And we can actually access any information. In fact, I'm fairly handy, like around the house and doing things. And a number of months ago, my water heater went out. And we all hate taking a cold shower. And so I went downstairs and I opened it up and the pilot light was out. So I tried to light it, I held it down, it would light, but as soon as I let go, it would go out. So what did I do? I Googled, why is the most common cause of your pilot light going out? And the answer came up right then, and it said, you know what, your thermostat is probably bad. So then I Googled, how do you replace the thermostat? And there was a YouTube video that was about 4 minutes long that showed you how to do it. And I went down to the hardware store, bought the thermostat for $12, put it in 20 minutes, and saved myself several $100s. Okay? We have instant access to information. Now, one of the sad things is that hasn't necessarily changed how we do things in schools. One example of that. How many of you remember studying the periodic table? Wasn't that the most exciting thing we did in school? I mean, that Na, Na was exciting because Na stands for what? Sodium. And we had to learn the atomic mass and how many valence electrons they had and all those kinds of things. And then I can remember taking those tests. Okay, what's the atomic mass of Na? Well, it's this, and we had to memorize all that. In today's society, and please don't take this wrong, but what a waste of time. I still need to know Na is sodium, but that's not what I want my students to be able to do. You know what I want them to be able to do? I want them to look at an element in column 2 and an element in column 6 and say, what happens if we put these two elements together? And if I put them together and there's a reaction, what can I expect? And if I add something else to it, can I get a further reaction, or is it going to stop? Because what that shows me is they actually understand what's happening. If they need to know the atomic mass, what can they do? They can Google it, or you know what else they can do? They can ask Alexa. I have a friend that's a science teacher in Texas that has Alexa in his room. They'll say, Mr. Jones, what's this? He say, ask Alexa. Because what we've done now is we have instant access to information. And I'm going to tell you one of the sad facts, though, is there are two organizations that take change at a snail's pace. One typically is government, and the second one is education. Now, I got a question for you. How many of your secondary students have one of these? All of them. How many of your primary students have one of these? Almost all of them. And you know what? Every day in their life, they want to know something, and what do? They pull this out and do this, right? Even as adults. I was with my brothers and their wives before I came over, and we were all together, and I looked over, and the other 5, I was looking at them, were all on their phone doing this, you know. You go into an airport anymore, people aren't talking to each other, what are they doing? This. So our students use this all the time to find information, to locate things, to do things, and what do we tell them to do when they get to school? And I know why. We have a lot of fears. Technology brings fear into the classroom. We were doing some things earlier, and I'll show you in a minute. But there are some challenges with it. But you know what? We need to really think about what we're doing in classes and why are we making them put this away. We're doing it because we don't want them chatting with their friends and we don't want them on Facebook. You know what? But what we have to do is start looking at how the tools operate and how we use them effectively. Not removing the tool, because that's instant access to information. Okay? So these are the 3 transformational shifts. We got through number 1, 2, and 3 really quickly. We only got 2 more to go. But these 2 are where we're going to spend the time. Now, one thing I'd like you to do, I've got to change it. I'm going to reset it up. But one thing I would like you to do is pull your phone out right now. Okay? And I want to know for you, what is the greatest challenge you have right now in using technology in your schools or your classrooms? Now, I want you to go to minty.com, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually give you a code, not the code on the screen because it shifted on me from yesterday. Now, I'm going to go to mintymeter.com. And by the way, this is a free site. It's a great polling piece of technology that you could use in your classroom. And here we go. I want to reset the results because I used this yesterday. And then I'm going to bring it up, okay? Now, when you go to minty.com on your phone, it's going to ask you for a code. Look up at the top there. Can you see that in the back? 28244825. And I want you to take a minute and just type in, what's the greatest challenge you're facing in using technology with your students? And I think we may find a variety of different answers that come up on here. Distraction. Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? Okay. They want to get on Facebook, or the next thing, internet connections. Inequality, avoiding distraction. Okay. Yeah, they don't want to do the science virtual lab. They want to play Fortnite. Okay. We know those kinds of things that are happening. Engaging them with the technology. Okay. The teacher doesn't feel comfortable. That is kind of a problem, you know. Consistency, playing games, and knowledge gap between educators and students. You know, guys, that's an interesting one. There is kind of a knowledge gap between us, but really it's only experiencing it. I can remember when we first started using computers, my wife was afraid of using it, and it was Microsoft Word. And why was she afraid of it? I don't know how to program computers, because in our minds we have to know everything about it. How many of you use Word? Oh, we use it all the time, don't we? We don't even think about it anymore. Why? Because we learned how to do it. So I think those gaps. Look at all the use of inappropriate websites, cheating. By the way, cheating, I have one teacher that actually put her classroom chairs in a U, and when the kids were on their computers, their backs were to her and the screens were in front so she could see every screen in the room just by walking in the middle. Okay? We've got to think about how we overcome some of these obstacles. We got a lot that are coming up here. You know what? Taking pictures, that's an interesting one, isn't it? And then sending the picture of that question to somebody else with the answer along to it. You know what? All of these are legitimate challenges. But the thing is, we can't let the challenges to stop us from using the materials to be effective, because technology is here. It's a powerful tool not only for students to access information, to understand information, and then also to produce information. So we've got to start thinking about some of these ideas. Now let me just mention this technology right here really quickly. You know what's so powerful about this? If I were to stop and ask that question of every one of you and had each of you answer, how long would that take? Yeah, we'd be done and you'd be going getting coffee break, okay? But here, instantaneously, I can answer it. You know the other thing it does? If I use this in a class of 30 students, think about what usually happens. I ask a question, how many hands go up to answer it? 4 or 5. And typically, it's the same 4 or 5 students, because many of our students are shy and don't want to say something in front of the class, and many other students don't want to get the answer wrong. With this, every student can respond and have a voice and participate in that class. These are some challenges, okay? But there are some tools that can help us do that. Let's go to number 4. Is that okay? Can we go to number 4? The 4 steps in digital transformation. Now, I mentioned to you today, some of the things we're going to talk about are not new. Many of you have probably seen this. In fact, if you don't mind, if you've seen the SAMR model before, just raise your hand for me. Put it up high so I can see. Okay? If you want this image, by the way, just Google SAMR model. You get 100 different versions of it to come up, always with these 4 steps. If you don't do anything else, remember one of the things I asked you was dream, create, and take action. If you don't do anything else than what I'm going to suggest right now, but you do this one thing, today will be totally worth your time. How many of you are classroom teachers? Raise your hand up high, classroom teachers. How many of you are building leaders? Building or school leaders? Very good. Okay, if I'm a classroom teacher, I need to think about my classroom with this. If I'm a building leader, it's even more important that you think about this for your school or your schools. When we use technology, we do one of 4 things with it. Number 1 at the bottom, you notice these first 2 talk about enhancement. Number 1 is substitution. And all substitution means is I've taken the technology to do exactly what I did before I used the technology. Anybody have a Kindle or a Nook? Yeah, I see a number of hands going up. Okay. Anybody put a book on this and use this to read with? Yeah. You know, I still like the physical book, to be honest with you, but I always have a book on here too, because I can only carry so many, and if I finish the one I brought with me, I want to have access to something to read. Using a Kindle or a Nook or a phone to read a book, that's substitution. I could read the book physically. I could read the book with my Nook or my Kindle. I would dare say that 80 to 85% of the technology we use in school is substitution. We're enhancing it. It's kind of nice. I can have a lot more books on this than I can have in my backpack, but all I'm doing is substituting. Substitution is not transformational. It's a nice tool. Then we go to the second one. The second one is augmentation. And I'm going to give you a couple examples as we go through. Augmentation, I'm still doing a direct substitute, but I can do some things with it I couldn't do otherwise. Think about that book. I can pull it up and now I can highlight it, I can leave notes on it, I can do text-to-speech on it. It's still a direct substitute, but I have an enhanced experience with it. That's augmentation. And I'm going to challenge you again. I think if you take our use of technology in the classroom and you take these first two, that's about 95% of what we use it for. It's enhancement, but it doesn't transform. Look at the next one. Modification. This is when we start to get into transformation. Modification allows for significant task redesign. It's going to change what I can do and how I can do it. Now, my background, science and math, I know I'm doing a literacy session a little bit, but the science and math part, I want you to think about one of my favorite parts to teach was the cell, and we're going to kind of look at that today. Okay? I always had students create a model of the cell. Sometimes they did it with pasta, sometimes they did it with pipe cleaners, but making all the different parts of the cell. And you know what? Really, it didn't do very much. It didn't really help them understand what a cell looked like. With technology in our biology program and our middle school science, we actually have 3D models, virtual models of the cell that students can actually take apart the layers and pull the organelles out and look at how that structure of the cell is happening. You know what? That's modification. I couldn't do that before without the technology and actually see it. We're able to do some labs today virtually that we could not have done before because they were microscopic, but now we can actually see how that reaction takes place because of it. That's what we mean by modification. And the last one is redefinition. Redefinition is something we could not do without the technology. It couldn't happen. There's no way you could interact or transform that without the technology. Now let me give you a couple really practical examples of this. But when I said if you don't do anything else, really, if you're a teacher in your classroom, you ought to be thinking, how am I using my technology? Where do I fall in on this chart? How much of my time is spent in substitution? And am I spending any time in redefinition? And if I'm not, my action step ought to be say, how do I go up one step? And then how do I go up another? If you're a building leader, it's even more important to be able to look at your school and say, how are we using the technology? And there's another question as a building leader you have to ask, is what kind of professional development am I giving my teachers to help them learn how to take it up another notch? Because you'll notice what happens at the top two steps. I start to transform education, and in fact, that's one of the things that pushes student achievement. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go online for a minute, and I'm going to show you some examples of an ebook. Okay? Let me escape out of this one. And let me look right here. Now, I'm going to show you 3 different ebooks, and here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to think in your mind, is this substitution, augmentation, modification, or redefinition? Okay? And I'm going to do it very simple. None of this high tech. I'm showing this out of our Inspire Biology, but what I want you to know, the things we're talking about today are not about a company, they're not about a program or a resource. It's about what we're doing with technology in our schools. So this first one, if you look at it, this is lesson 3, the cycling and matter, and in fact, I'm actually going to change that lesson. I'm going to scroll down. I want to get down to the cell because I want to make sure I use the same one. Let's go into the cell. Let's jump down to cell structure and function. And let's go to lesson 4. So I'm going to pull that up. There's my lesson 4. Okay? If you look at this, structures and organelle, there's my focus question. That focus question is the same focus question that's in the print book. Scroll down a little bit more. I've got an image right here. That image is the same image that's in the print book. Okay? I can look at my collecting evidence, what the things I have online I can use, my pictures and all this. Right now what we've seen, just looking at this, is this substitution, augmentation, modification, or redefinition? Substitution. That's all it is. That's great. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Okay? I have access to this anywhere I go. I can jump around in the book really quickly. Now, if I go down here, though, and let's say I highlight this piece, immediately I can highlight, I can leave notes, I can actually have the text read to me. Where am I at now? Augmentation. Okay? Actually kind of a nice step because of my students struggling with reading, especially if they're a second language student. I can hear the audio of it, help increase my understanding. But really in this book, all it is, it's like using that Kindle. Let me show you a second version of the ebook. Okay? I'm going to go over this. It's called Cell Shape and Function. And let me tell you what we've done. We've actually taken the first book we were looking at. This comes out of the same lesson. We've chunked it into topic-sized pieces under cell structure and function. You're going to notice if you look up at the top of there, this is one of 5 screens the student can look at. It's not the whole lesson. There are actually in this about 5 of these chunks that make up the whole lesson. But if I look at this, cell shape and movement, components of the cytoskeleton, I bet none of you realized you were going to be looking at such exciting stuff today, okay? Actually, cells are fascinating. But if I scroll down, I still have all of the things that were in the book until I get down to here. Look at microtubules and microfilaments. Microtubules and microfilaments are the things that give the cell structure. Now, when we're in class and we're talking about this, our students are just glued to this. And when they see this picture in the book, they immediately know what the microfilaments and the microtubules are, right? No, you know what? That picture is, they're not even trying to figure it out, all right? Now, when I go into this, you'll notice with this one, select the buttons at the bottom to see the structure of the cytoskeleton. So let's look at the plasma membrane. Oh, that's what the plasma membrane is, that part. Well, I wonder what the microfilaments are. Oh, it's those yellow pieces that kind of look like a connect that's branching in there. And so I wonder if that's the microfilaments. What are the microtubules? Oh, they're those straight pieces that go across. And then I can look at it all together, and you know what? Here's my membrane, there's my microfilaments, here's my microtubules actually going through. And you know what? This isn't DOK level 3 and 4. They're not creating new stuff, but what it does is causes an increase in understanding in that student about exactly what we're talking about, and it also gives them an idea of how that actual structure takes place. Okay? Can I do that in my print book? No. You know what? Where have we gone? Are we at substitution, augmentation, modification, or... We're in that space between modification and augmentation, or augmentation, modification. Now, let me go to the next page here, okay? If I go to the next page, and I'm looking at my cell appendages, and I scroll down a little bit, not only because before I would say, if I was teaching, I'd say, they have these flagella, and those flagella go like this, okay? Immediately when a student's in here, they don't need me doing the windmill up in front of the class. They can actually see how that movement happens. We're now into modification. You know, I've actually changed it, and again, I'm increasing understanding of my students. As they start to work their way through this, oh, by the way, I should have done this before. This is a little free tip if you use a PC. You notice on my screen how I have that ugly URL bar up at the top? If I hit my F11 key, that actually disappears and my screen is much more delightful for my students. And then I'm going to go to page 3. I'm just going to click through a couple of these screens. I now have a second piece of this. If I go to page 4, I've got some immediate response questions with feedback for me as a student. So I can now look, what components make up the cytoskeleton? Well, I just looked at this. What do I think it is? And I can immediately check my answer. Now, it's not an assessment, it's for me. And then when I go to the last page, actually built into this little chunk of text is an assessment that you can access because students, I had this open too long, which is why it timed out on me. It's actually a 3-question assessment that provides you with data. We're now into modification. That's a different experience. I want to show you one last ebook if you don't mind. This is what I didn't already open up because it would time out on me. This is called Smart Book. So I'm going to go into my same lesson and I'm going to open Smart Book. It's going to take just a second to load. But this is really, we're looking at the same lesson in an ebook. Okay? Welcome to SmartBook. This is how it works. I can start with reading or I can start with questions. Which one do you want to start with? That's what every student is going to do. They're going to start with the question. For our instance today, I'm going to disappoint you and we're going to start with reading. And the only reason I want to do that, I want you to look up here. Does this lesson look familiar? It's the same lesson I pulled up when I first pulled the ebook up. In fact, if I scroll down, you're going to notice the same image, the same question that it starts out with. The only difference right here is I have some highlighted text on here. And you know what? The student didn't do this. We did it when we created the book. And the reason we did is many of our students, even many of our students in university, when they pick up text and they read it, they don't really have any idea of what's the important stuff, what's the secondary, what's ancillary. They can't identify that. In fact, in high school, we have trouble getting the students to even read the material. What this does is a student can go over here and they can click on this button right here. They can look at the essential information in this lesson to have primary understanding of the topic that we're exploring. Now, all of my English teachers hate this. Because they'll tell me, and some of you will come up after and say, you know what, I want my students to be able to do this for themselves. And you know what, that's our goal. But most of them don't know how to do this. And in fact, one of the best strategies for understanding informational text is skim it and get the highlights first and then go back and go in depth. And you know what we're doing here? We're allowing it to skim it, look at the essential information that they need to understand the topic. But I will tell you, if they only read this part, we're farther ahead than if they don't read any of it. And we're helping them then understand. And you know what? The other thing, if I'm worried about them being able to do it on their own, we don't have to use it every lesson. I can help start guiding them into identifying what the important information is. After I do that, I'm going to go to my questions. Well, this one's a fill in the blank. The blank is a supporting network of long, thin protein fibers that form a framework for the cell and provide an anchor for organelles inside the cells. Okay? Microfilament or microtubule? Let's say tubule. How confident are we? High, medium, or low? Low. Let's say low. We were incorrect. It was a cytoskeleton. Okay? I'm going to go to the next question. I want you to notice what happens. I'm going to get this one wrong. Okay? This is the nucleus. I'm going to say medium. I got that wrong. Notice what it says on the top here. Before moving on, you must do what? Because you don't know this. So right here, here's my resource. Let's read about the content. Notice where it's taken me. Yes, right to that idea. Because this is not an assessment. This is a learning tool about those DOK level 1 and 2 concepts, so in class they can deal with DOK level 3 and 4. But it takes them right to here. You know what starts to happen with this? After I look at that, I can go back to the questions, and I can now go to the next question. Okay? This is match it up with the thing. So I'm going to do a drag and drop here when I do this. But you know what? I'm starting to do that, and I realize I don't know the answer to this one. So instead of just guessing, I can go down here and say, read about the concept. And where's it going to take me? Back into that idea, and then I can go back to my questions. And so some people will say, well, they can just look up the answers. Well, you know what? Yeah, they can look up the answers. That's the whole point of it, for them to develop their understanding. Now, let me just tell you what happens with this. At the top of this page, there are going to be 26 different concepts, and over time, students are going to master those. That experience is going to be different for every single student that's using it. And in fact, when they get done, let's say they've mastered all, by mastered, they've been able to answer the questions for all 26. At any point in time, they can come back and recharge that. And when they recharge, the questions are going to come up with the ones they had most difficulty with first. So those are the ones they're reviewing. It's adaptive. It personalizes the experience for students. So let me ask you, substitution, augmentation, modification, or redefinition? This is redefinition because you couldn't do this before without the technology. Okay? This changes the game for every one of our students. In fact, we've been using this in higher ed for about 13 years. And the research has shown over time that students score on average about 11 percentage points higher in a class where they're using this and a class where they're not. Because they're able to take the learning into their own hands. They don't have to have you telling the information to all of them. And then what we do in class is we help them understand the significance and the application of that information. 3 different ebooks, all with a different purpose, all allowing us to start transforming what's happening in the classroom. Now I'm going to give you one more example real quick, and then we're going to move on to number 5, okay? We looked at this example of the ebooks. This is one, has nothing to do with McGraw Hill. This is one in using Google Earth. How many of you have used Google Earth before? Google Earth, yeah. If you haven't used it, go to Google Earth and look up your address. Kind of cool to see the satellite images of your house or your apartment, and then it's kind of cool to see how long ago that was taken. Okay? I brought it up in the summer before when I was living in Michigan and there was snow in the yard. So I think, oh, this wasn't today, but you know, it is my house. Now, I now live in Denver, Colorado. Anybody been to Denver? Ah, good, I got some people have. A lot of mountains, a lot of sunshine. Substitution, okay? Use Google Earth instead of an atlas to find a place. So you could pull up Google Earth and you could say, where is Denver, Colorado? It would pull it up. Same thing as if I open an atlas. All it is substitution. Notice the second one. Use the Google Earth ruler to measure the distance between 2 places. So you might say, I wonder how far Dubai is from Denver. Now, you could do that with the atlas. You could get your ruler out and measure that little thing at the bottom and then try to figure out, you know, how many centimeters it is all the way over to Denver and then multiply by that number. And you could figure out how far it is. Which would be more accurate? Google Earth would be. That's why it's modification. I can still do that, but this makes it a lot better. When we go up to the next one, modification, use Google Earth layers such as panoramic and 360-degree cities. So you could actually take Denver and do a 360-degree view of what Denver looks like. And I don't know if you've seen this, but they're even incorporating this into our map programs. If you look an address up on Apple Maps, a lot of times right below it, it says, look around. And you can start moving that phone around and actually seeing what does that street look like and what other buildings are here. That's modification. And then look at the last one. Create a narrative Google Earth guided tour and share this online. And think if a student had to take Google Earth and do a trip from Dubai to Denver and hit every landmark that they're going to pass on that trip, explain the significance, and then post that online for viewing by other people. That's redefinition. You can't do that without the technology. You know what? The student would have a much greater idea of both geography, the significance of the landmark, and the places they visited, regardless of how many lectures we gave them about it. We need to be thinking in those areas, how much am I using substitution? How much am I augmenting? Am I doing any modification or redefinition? The power of technology is in modification and redefinition. Companies are doing it all the time. If you go to Amazon and you're looking for something, let's say you're looking for a backpack because you're going to want to go hiking and camping out in the mountains. By the way, just curious, how many of you like to do that? Okay, some of you do. Some of you, your idea of camping is a really nice hotel room. Okay, and that's okay. But if I go to Amazon and I go in there and search backpack, it's going to pull some up. What's it going to do right underneath that? You might also be interested in all of these other things. Okay? And I don't know if you know this or not, but after you're visiting your phone, if you bring Google up on your phone, the articles come up are related to things that you've already been looking at. Companies are doing it all the time. When are we going to start doing it in education? But as a building leader, it does take professional support for your teachers to understand how we do this, because once we start doing it, we can get pretty creative. And think about it. And you know what? We build some of this stuff into our programs, but there are so many free tools online. Anybody using Nearpod? Yeah, I mean, there are so many online that you can use to start doing this. So let's move to number 5. And this is the part we're going to wrap up in the next 13 minutes. Okay? 5 things that you should be doing with technology that fall into that modification and redefinition stage. Okay? Number 1 is building fluency. Now, when I say that, when I say fluency, what subject do you think of? We think of reading, right? We think of reading. What grade level do we think of? Most people think of K1 and 2. Let's get fluent in our phonics and all that kind of thing. But you know what? Fluency isn't limited to reading, and it's not limited to primary grades. We can be fluent in math. And in fact, we want our students to be fluent in math. That's why we teach them math facts. That's why we do the times tables. But you know what? It doesn't stop at the times tables. If I'm in algebra, I want a student to be fluent in decomposing a polynomial. If they're in science, what do we do in science that causes fluency? Yes. And you know what? Even those science and engineering practices, one of those is I want them to be able to create an argument using evidence. Most of them, you don't even know how to find evidence. Okay? I want to mathematically be able to read a graph and know what that graph is saying and about the equation that goes with it. The more I do that, the more fluent I can become. And then you don't even think about it. Like when I separate a polynomial anymore, you just know automatically how it happens and start doing it. You don't have to stop and say, oh, I got to look that up. Fluency is all about practice. The thing technology can do with fluency is say that you don't have to do it in the classroom. Students can do it on their own. Now, this is one simple example. This comes out of Wonders. And this is a first grade example about building fluency with sounds. And what I want to do here, listen to the sounds of each word and identify which sound is the same in all of them. And then select one of the large boxes to indicate whether it's the beginning, middle, or end sound. Will you guys play this with me? Okay, so let's listen to this word. Oh, you know what I did? I've got the video on here. Let me switch over really quick. Okay, let's do the real thing. All right?
Cape.
Oh, you guys can't hear that, can you? Let's try this. Here we go. The cord came loose.
Cape. Rake. Wave.
Now, I have all those blended sounds, right, that form the word. Then as a student, I can come over here and listen to the individual sounds.
A.
Let's go to the next one.
A. W. A. V.
Which sound is the same, first, second, or third? Ah, we got it right. Yes. And then you're going to notice down at the bottom there are 11 different words I'm going to go into. Just looking at this, which sound is the same, first, second, or third? Cake, cat, cub. Everybody thought it was a bear. Cub. Which sound is the same? But you know what's so important here? This is for first grade. One of the essential parts of reading is hearing the sounds. I can do this on my own. And in fact, for your parents that their students' English is their second language, this allows the parent to actually help the student because I don't have to know it myself. I can use the technology to do it. Okay? It's building it in. This is just one example of fluency that you can use technology. One of our programs in math is called ALEX. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. ALEX allows students to build fluency around math. I'm going to take you to my second example then. Fluency is one. Yeah, it's coming back. Let's go to the next one. Modeling. Again, not limited to the subject area. This one I'm going to show you in middle school math. This is 8th grade math. And what I wanted to do is model the concept of slope. Well, let me take you over here. Oh, one more. Okay, this is our Reveal Math, Course 8. Again, the idea about modeling is not about our program. I'm just going to use technology in it to show you that. And I'm going to go over here to a sketch that's going to let me model slope. So right at the beginning for the students, here's how you use this. But we want to look and say, do you think the point will eventually reach the target? Okay, press the Take a Step button to test your conjecture. So we have a point here that's at 6, 6 on the coordinate grid. If I take one vertical step for one horizontal step, will I hit that point? Well, let's try it. Oh, I moved my curve. There we go. We going to hit it? Ah, we got it. Okay. Now, I'm going to go to the next page of this. So this first page is just to say, do you know how to use this? Okay. Are we going to hit 6, 6? Now, when we come to the second page of this, it's going to say, what other sets of values will hit the target? I'm still at 6, 6. What other numbers could I put in there that would also help me hit that? 2 over 2. What? Okay. So as a student, if I'm fluent and already know this, I'm going to know the sets. There are 3 other sets of values, 2, 2, 3, 3, and 6, 6. But if I don't know it, I can go in here and say, you know what, I think maybe 2 and, I don't know, maybe 3. Let's try that, okay? And I can take my step, and then I'm realizing I'm not going to hit it. So I can reset it and I can try it again. You know, all we're doing is starting to model. If I go to the next screen on this, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, I think you're starting to get the idea, but if I go to the next one, we're not just going to use 6, 6. Let's move the target. What if I go up to 8 and over to 12? What values could I put in here now? Well, what if I did 4, and if I do 4, what does this need to be? Let's try 6 and see if that's going to do it. Okay. Oh, yeah, that did work. And then what's the line that goes along with that? You know what happens here? When students play with the idea, the words actually make sense. Now I'm starting to understand what slope is. How do we define slope? Rise over run. What have they been doing in this modeling exercise? Rise over run. You know what? We do this in science with virtual investigations. If you're a science teacher or if you're a building leader and your science teachers are not using PhET simulations, that PhET, they ought to be doing that. All they are technology models. Why are these so important? Because they allow us to interact and gain conceptual understanding. I want to show you one more model. This one I'm just going to show you the video of. This is 6th grade. It's the idea of ratios in math. And here, I'm going to explore ratios by mixing colored water together. Now, you could do this hands-on, but this is modification. And by the way, I wouldn't want to do this hands-on with my 6th grade class. Okay? Just because of the mess it's going to make when they do that. But here it tells me, in the left cylinder, mix 5 milliliters of blue and 15 of yellow. Okay? So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to put 5 in. I'm going to put 15 in. That's a single batch of green. Now, which of these others will make a single batch of green? Will 20 and 20? Well, I don't know. Let me try it. Same green? Nope. And I could go back through, reset this, and play with it. The thing the technology does is let me model that experience over and over again with changes that I could never do in the same time if I was really using the colored water and those graduated cylinders. Okay? By playing with this idea, I'm going to learn what a double batch is. I'm going to learn what a triple batch is. And I haven't even used the word ratio yet. I know if I doubled both the amounts, it's going to be the same. If I triple, what supposition can I make? Well, if I put 6 times in of each, It's going to be the same because I start to understand what ratio means. That's what we mean by modeling. You can model in every subject area. And in fact, we need to be doing it because this is one of the things that increases student understanding both of DOK level 1 and 2, but also DOK level 3 and 4 concepts. Okay? Number 3, we ought to be personalizing. We looked at this with SmartBook, and all I have on this screen, these are different theories that go into adaptive learning. We always have had students that have been at different levels in our classrooms, haven't we? How many of us as teachers differentiate learning? All of us do. Okay? Here's the struggle with differentiation, and we ought to be doing it. All of our programs, and in fact, almost any program you buy that's a core program, whether it's reading, science, math, social studies, or history, is going to come with some built-in differentiation. It's going to have some support for students that are approaching level. It's going to have some extension for students that need to go beyond level. There's 2 problems with differentiation. One, out of the 35 students in my class, they're not on 3 different levels. How many levels are they on? 35 different levels. And in fact, the other problem with differentiation is we can only differentiate maybe 1 grade level below, maybe we can stretch a little bit below that. Maybe a grade level above to extend that learning. In fact, going above is easier than going below. But if I have a student, let's say that's in 7th grade math, and they're missing multiplication facts, as a 7th grade teacher, I'm not equipped to reach down to that level. Adaptive personalized learning can do that for you, and it doesn't happen in the classroom. This is even more important now because how much learning loss has happened in the last 2 years because of COVID? Significant amount. It's always been there, but really this needs to happen. Building leaders, I'm going to address this one to you again. A classroom teacher can work with that differentiation, a grade level down. I can do a diagnostic assessment, I can look at the prerequisite skills, and I can support students with that. But I can't go back multiple grade levels. We really need to be looking at what we're doing in our buildings with intervention. Okay? And by intervention, not in the core classroom, but where am I making the time for students to go back and recover missing skill sets? There are a ton of different adaptive programs out there. Redbird is one of ours for K-8 math. Alex is probably the best, and I'm not just saying this because I work for McGraw Hill. There's 20 years of research behind this. Alex is the best adaptive math program to support students from grades 3 all the way up into college. In fact, quite a few universities use this as their remediation or introductory math course. The one where you go take the test and you're not ready for the first math course. We have a lot of universities using this for Alex. And in fact, we have universities in the UAE using this. It allows students on their own to recover information, okay? Don't you love that picture? Don't you wish that was hanging in your house? You know what this is? This is all the way I can go from that bottom equation to the solution up at the top. Hundreds of different ways. What Alex does is it realizes that every student is going to do it a little bit different way. It knows how they do it. And you as a teacher then, not only do students recover the information, you know exactly where every one of your students is with each of the topics. There's adaptive learning for reading, there's adaptive learning for science. You really need to look though at the math and the literacy pieces. What am I doing for my students? Okay? I'm going to end up with these 2 and I don't have the time to go into it like I would like. Okay, let me get up here. This one right here, analyzing data. And what I mean by that, we give a lot of assessments, but if you don't do anything with the assessments, you've been wasting your time. That data ought to lead you to something like this. This is a module assessment for math, 3rd grade math. I give that assessment. It tells me what 2nd grade skills are being assessed. And if I do it digitally, it tells me which of my students are missing those skills. And it has a built-in intervention lesson to support that student. One I can do small group with them, or one I could assign out that they can do on their own. We need to be analyzing the data. If we're not, then that is going to get us in trouble. And then this is an example of that diagnostic. Here's the concept they're missing. Those are the students that are missing it, and I can immediately assign out that piece that looks at the prerequisite skill. And if we do this, then the other part that goes along with it, let me click ahead right here, is intervention. The other thing we need to be using technology for is intervention, but I'm in with this concept because I'm a couple minutes over. One of the areas where we've failed our students over the years is really in intervention. If I have a student in 7th grade that can't read or that struggles with reading, you know why they struggle with reading, most of them? Because they're missing the skills from K1 and 2. I don't know a middle school teacher that has been trained on teaching reading. We teach literature, and we teach structure and craft. But if that student in 7th grade is missing skills from K1 and 2, they're never going to become a fluent reader until they recover those skills. If you have a student in algebra that is missing multiplication facts, they're never going to be good at math because it's foundation to that, and that 7th grade or high school teacher cannot take them back to recover those facts. The greatest gift we can give our students is the gift of reading. And if we're not looking and setting aside intervention time to do that, we're going to fail those students because we're not going to help them have the tools they need to work on grade level. And the reason I say it's not the grade level teacher's responsibility, my responsibility as a 7th grade teacher is to cover the 7th grade standards, and I can do that one level down support. What's the immediate prerequisite skill? If I use the data analysis to know which students are lacking that, but I can't do that multiple grade level intervention. So really what I've thrown out today is 5 different ideas. Okay, number 1, we kind of set out, we're not covering everything about technology, we're not really looking at product. Number 2, I ask you to do 2 things, to think about what we talked about today and in the breakouts, and then to create, dream, and take action. So I want you to think about right now, what's the one thing I need to really think about or do when I leave here based on what we just looked at? Number 3, we looked at those big changes we did. One of those changes is technology. Instead of being afraid of it and putting it away, how do we create an environment where we can use this to really change the outcomes for our students? Number 4 was those 4 steps in the use of technology: substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. And then we looked at 5 different things you could do along that modification, redefinition line in building fluency, modeling, personalized learning, analyzing data, and then based on that data, actually building out intervention that are best, these things best done with technology that we can't do in another way. So I'm going to end with this question: what are you going to do with it? Because otherwise, kind of wasted our time today. So I'd love you to think about what's the 1 or 2 things that I really want to do. And if you don't do anything other than taking that SAMR model and evaluating your classroom or your school, and then saying, what do I do differently to help us take a step up that ladder, that would be ultimately successful. It will help our students. And you know what the outcome of that? It's improved student achievement for our students. So I want to thank you. Just a couple of housekeeping notes real quick. We're going to take a 15-minute coffee break. The coffee is out here. Then we're going to go to the breakout rooms. Literacy is going to stay in here. Science and math are just to your right. For those of you that are joining us virtually, you have a link in the email that was sent you to join which of the breakouts you want to join. Take your 15-minute break. Get your coffee break at home. We couldn't send it to you. And then join the breakout that you want. So go ahead, get your refreshment, take a little bit of break and rest. Thank you very much.
is
Hi.
one word I missed out right.
Yes.
The first two were enhancement, the other two, modification and redefinition. You had written a definition before I wrote it just.
Transformation.
Transformation.
Yes.
Will this PPTs be accessible anywhere?
Pardon?
Will the presentation be
Yeah,
accessible?
we'll do a PDF of it and ask
Thank
them to
you.
send
Thank
it out.
Good morning. It was so interesting.
Oh,
We
thank
were really
you.
hooked up. We have one question related to the English book. So we are asking whether you have something for AP and the resources. For example, we can use online.
AP?
Yeah,
Yes.
we are talking about high grades.
Yep. So let me turn this off just for a second.
Yeah.
Still it is full.
Good. Okay, is it working? That's always good. Just want to make sure you're in the right place. We're going to do literacy in here, math and science in there, and